Hey, just before we jump into the episode, I'm wondering if you're using Medic at your company, if you're an AE or a sales leader listening to this. I've implemented Medic 3 times when I was a VP of sales, and now I help sales organizations implement Medic with their teams. I've got a free deal scorecard that you can basically evaluate and score your opportunities using the MedPick framework to see where you've got gaps, where there's risk in your forecast, so that you can identify them and do something about it and mitigate that risk. So if you want to get a copy of that, head over to the website. There'll also be a link in the show notes. Go to therevenueenabler.com. You'll see there's a drop down called the Learning Hub. There's a button called the Downloads. When you go there, you're looking for the MedPick deal score sheet. You can get instant access to that, as well as other things like the What We've Heard slide, my ghosting playbook, cold call scorecard, story builder, AI sales assistant, and so much more. So head over to therevenueenabler.com, go check out the Learning Hub and our downloads, and let's jump into the episode now.
Welcome to Hit Your Numbers, a weekly podcast for sellers and sales leaders who are serious about hitting their targets. Whether you're an SDR booking meetings, an AE chasing the next big close, or a sales leader building high-performance teams, we're here to help you hit target, boost pipeline, and become a top-performing seller. This week, we're talking about the fact that champions can't win without a business case. Is there something that your seller can do to help your champion sell your product internally? So let's start with some statistics and the reason we're talking about this subject. So in the 2025 benchmark reports from Ebster and Pavilion, it states that 78% of sellers are missing their quota. More importantly, just 14% of sellers are driving 80% of the revenue. Now, this is no surprise to us at the Revenue Enabler. I also read that an average of 11 people are actually taking part in the decision-making process for B2B SaaS sales as well, which is why it's so important that you need a champion. So James, why is it important for sellers to have a champion?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and people do ask that from time to time. If you think about the history of B2B sales, from like when the very first B2B sales transaction ever took place, somebody was driving consensus in the customer's organization to say, I think we should do this differently, and I think this is how we should do it. So if you think about like fast forward to where we are today, the way the economy is, the way that selling is, if somebody isn't walking the corridors and popping their head into different people's offices saying, hey, I think we should do this, do you fancy coming to this conversation for these reasons? I think sellers going to really, really struggle. And in fact, they're going to really struggle to get anywhere in a sales process, let alone to the finish line, be close one. So for me, champions is a critical component that sales organizations really need to grab with two hands, run very deep, thorough enablement programs around, just to make sure that their sellers are equipped to be able to identify a champion, to build and develop one, and then enable them to drive consensus across the customer's organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the real value of having a champion is the fact that they understand the organization internally as well. So when they understand how to use your product, they can communicate that in terms that their colleagues are going to understand, which a seller might not be able to. They might not get the internal lingo or the terminology that's being used in the office, but the champion can, which is ultimately what you need, especially in those six-figure deals. So how would a business case help a champion?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of ways. And just to go back to kind of what you were saying there as well, I think it's like really, really important that sellers have got like a win-loss analysis that happens every kind of 90 days where they can actually see what good looks like, and they can see the difference between when a deal's won, what does a champion look like, and how did we qualify, how do we enable them, and when we lost a deal to status quo, to a competitor, to a competing project, what does that look like? And we can spot the pattern and those trends, right? And I'd also add as well, if a champion doesn't have the information, doesn't mean they're not a champion, but this is a great testing point. So let's say, I'm trying to sell to you, Matt, and you're my champion as a chief marketing officer. I'm trying to sell you, ABM software, and we're trying to quantify impact around metrics, and I ask you about a specific metric, you might need to go away and capture that data, right? And that's absolutely okay. But a champion, based on qualification, which we'll get into, they want you to be successful. You want me to be successful as a seller because you have something to gain from me being successful, right? So, they'll also bring you those insights. This is who we're talking to. This is the positioning that we need to align with. But also, I don't have that information, but no drama. Let me go get that for you because, again, it will help with the business case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I think there's another discussion here to have on how to spot a champion as well. I think there's probably a knack to finding that one person who's really going to push what you're selling into the organization.
I just digress a little bit there. I just wanted to add that context to the conversation. But to answer your question, like how is a business case going to help? Well, if we take a step back and forget about the seller for just a moment, being a buyer at the moment is pretty tough. I mean, it has been for a good couple of years now. It's not like pre-COVID, especially in SaaS, where there's just money floating around. People could spend what they want on, whatever they wanted, even if it's like a nice to have, something that we should just test. Didn't have to worry too much about like experimental budgets. We could just kind of make a request and get it approved in most cases, right? Now things are a little bit tougher. So, but being a buyer is tough. So the ripple effect of that is that naturally sales is going to become a little bit harder as well, right? And I think a lot of sellers are running the old playbook, which isn't that effective today. And that's where they're really struggling. And that's why we're seeing pipeline bloat. We're seeing deals bloat up and get stuck in the middle of the sales funnel and struggle to move forward because champions, if you've got one, which in most cases sellers don't, they have more than have a coach. If they do have a good champion, they're really struggling to tell that value story across the customer's organization. So let's talk about the buying piece for just a second. We all know it. We see it. You mentioned a couple of reports there. We all read them. Buying committees are getting bigger. I think even Gartner found like anywhere between 8 to 12 people, stakeholders are involved in the decision process. They're not all involved in that one meeting. Sometimes they are, but they usually get involved in different parts of the process. So I talk about the 3 Ps: problem, process, and people. And those people can get involved early on, mid-stage, late stage, etc. Unfortunately, most sellers are only spending time with 1, maybe 2 people. So if we think about an opportunity for sellers, how do I get access to the other stakeholders? And then how do I do stakeholder mapping to understand if they're my champion, a competitor's champion, or maybe they're actually backing a different project completely and they need budget for it. So being a buyer is really, really tough. Another thing I was saying, I've definitely been on the receiving end of this when I was a VP of sales. Buyers are risk averse and they're skeptical. Like if I'm going to put my name to something, I don't want to damage my internal reputation if it doesn't go to plan. If it isn't what it ends up being when I buy it. And I think Gartner, again, I read in a report that they found recently that 60% of B2B buyers suffer with buyer's remorse. So like at least one of their purchases in the last 12 to 18 months they regret making. And I think they found like it was a lot higher than just one in a lot of those cases. So bigger buying committees, buyers are risk averse, they're skeptical, more skeptical than they ever have been before. And also budgets are tighter, right? So at the beginning of a fiscal period, finance aren't allowing the different departments to have these like wild, massive budgets. They're a lot tighter. So creating new budget based on that situation without any clear justification, business case, is really, really tough. So those are kind of the core buying challenges that we're seeing with our customers when we're doing consulting and enablement and training. And then naturally, Matt, the ripple effect of that is that selling is going to become harder because sellers now need to adapt in this new world. Buyers are expecting sellers to come with insights, add value, help them navigate the organization, tell that value story, as we call it. And if they're not set up for success as sellers to do that, the only thing they're going to be doing is putting their best foot forward, which is around products and capability. And you and I know that that isn't justification.
Absolutely. And I really agree with your point about it's harder for buyers. There is that aspect of internal credibility. And, if you're selling something, you know the value of it. But as a buyer, you have to live with that. And, depending on how much the product costs, you could be sat in a room with the CEO, the CFO, trying to convince them that this £100,000 product is going to change things. So you need to be really convinced as well because you're putting your neck on the line.
100%. And look, it's no wonder that win rates are down, sales cycles are up, target attainment's in a bad way, because sellers are selling like, let's take this this podcast software we're using. There's a red button in the top right corner. Nobody cares about that. Maybe the person that's going to be a day-to-day user cares about what that button does. But the economic buyer, an executive that needs to create money, they need to take money from another project to fund this initiative. They care about that button in the top right corner. They care about the outcomes that that capability delivers, right? So again, if sellers aren't set up to help their champion tell that value story internally, how do we take the connection between capabilities and business outcomes? If we don't have that in a 1-2 page doc so that we can enable them to go and tell that story, again, things are going to kick in like ghosting. One of the big reasons why people ghost us like mid-cycle is because they're embarrassed. They're struggling to drive consensus, or they've asked the question, they've been shot down, but the sellers built great rapport, and they don't want to give people that they like bad news, so they ghost you and just think that you're going to go away and not follow up, and that's usually what a lot of sellers do. So I think again, it has to come back to this mindset of, I talk about it all of the time, as sellers, our job isn't to align with budget. Our job is to create budget, and business cases help us do it by highlighting cost of inaction, inefficiency, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And a good business case will accurately represent what your product's going to do as well. So
Yeah.
that the buyer really understands the value there. So it's so important to the narrative that you're telling the prospects, really. What information do you need for a business case? And I appreciate this might be a bit sales 101, but for someone who isn't versed in creating business case or business cases, say you're new to sales, I'm guessing there's templates out there online, but more importantly, there's an element of the process where you need to pick up that information, right, during discovery.
Yeah, totally. So loads of templates out there. We have a bunch. I've been using business cases now for 6-7 years. Ever since I started to find I was selling to a buyer that isn't like an out the box natural buyer. They don't usually have a seat at the table. So take things like HR teams. Spent a good few years building a couple of HR sales organizations, selling to sales HR organizations. They don't have a seat at the table. They don't have budget to execute. When they become a buyer, don't really know what's going on. They become a bit of a control freak. So I needed to be able to deal with that. So having a really good template. Look, there's nothing wrong using a deck. The problem I have with decks is marketing usually get involved in them. Matt, cover your ears. And look, they look fantastic, and I think they are good, like enablement resources for the champion to share with like other people in the organization, like champion level people, department leaders, that kind of stuff. I don't think those decks are great for economic buyer conversations because they're usually full of slide number 1 looks great. Slide number 2, here's all of our executive team. Slide 3, this is like a map of the world and there's little pins of our worldwide offices. Slide 4, here's all our VCs. Slide 5, here's our G2 crowd 50 badges. Get it, right?
Plenty of those together, yes.
Absolutely. And that's great for your champion because they want to feel like you guys are the real deal. We can really, we're trusted advisors. Economic buyers don't care about that stuff, right? And if they do, they want to understand value first, those niceties last. And if you think about an economic buyer, they're typically somebody in the C-suite, okay? Not all the time, but most of the time. And I Googled the other day, what's the average attention span of a like quote unquote economic buyer? And it said 8.25 seconds, down from 12 seconds a few years ago. So it's never been great. If you're in a call with someone that's at economic buyer status, you'll notice they start to switch off pretty quick unless you're focused on stuff that they care about. Okay, so the reason the business case for me should be in like a Google Doc is because it's very hard to make it look very jazzy, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's about the content, the copy that's inside of that, not the aesthetics, like how it looks. Obviously, we want it to look fairly good, but the reason that ours adds so much value to sellers is because the bit that you're asking, I guess, is around the context of it. For me, it's about that current state, future state. Where are you today? Where do you need to be? Need being the key word, be tomorrow, and what's stopping you from getting there? So, like, if I can, on page 1, and anyone that's listening to this is try and visualize like just a 1-page Google Doc or a Microsoft Word doc. At the top, we want to think about their current state. And Matt, you'll probably, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's like good marketing copy. So if I'm writing a blog, every line needs to sell you on the next line. I need to hook you, rehook you, and keep you engaged. And that's what that 1-page business case for me is all about. So have that like call to action at the top with cost of inaction. So, implement the revenue enabler to recover 750K in lost ARR, right? For an economic buyer, like a CFO, that's going to be really, attractive. They're going to grab their attention. Next line is that executive summary. And then what we want to do is have our problem statement with our root cause analysis. So we've identified these problems in our business and we believe that they are being caused by these 2 or 3 things. And those are the 3 things that a CFO wants you to solve for. Okay, and that bit is so important, and we're going to capture that in really good discovery when we're doing that first initial conversation with our prospect. If we can really get to the root cause of their problem, people want to allocate money to solve those things because they'll know they'll never come back. I always use this example when I'm doing training with sales organizations where I'm looking into my garden. When I'm not working, I try and spend some good time in the garden that gets me away from my desk. And let's say like one of the rose bushes is dying, right? I can just see there's petals all over the floor. That's a problem, but it's not the problem. The problem is I probably planted it in a place where it doesn't get much sun. Maybe I've forgotten to water it. Maybe where I planted it, there's not enough room for the roots to grow. There's like rocks and things like that in the borders, right? So the root cause issue is the plant's probably just in the wrong place. It's not being watered. So I wonder if I move it and set an alarm on my phone to go out and water it every day, I wonder if that will solve the problem. And if we can help our buyer see their problem like that and then articulate that in a business case, finance are likely going to feel comfortable that, hey, we're actually going to solve this problem forever or for a very long time. Now you've got my attention. All right. So really strong headline, hook them hard. Okay. Then call out the problem, clearly articulating what's causing that problem to exist. And then, guys, you can talk about your favorite topic, which is the plan. Yeah. How are you going to solve that problem specifically? Okay. And that just needs to be like a couple of lines. It doesn't need to be anything too heavy. Doesn't need to have loads of like feature slides and things like that. Just clearly document a couple of bullets, maybe with a paragraph with it, to say this is how we're going to solve it. And this is how we're going to solve it better or differently than anybody else. Like, here's our unique differentiation. So that's like the current state. How are you doing it today? Because everyone's getting the job done without you, let's be honest, right? But it's maybe not being done in the most effective way and it's costing them money. So that's the current state. The bit in the middle, the plan, is how we're going to get them to the future state. And how do we know when we're in the future state? That's going to be metrics. Yeah. So anyone that's listening to this that's a medic seller, and if you're not a medic seller, this is still going to be extremely relevant to you. When that business case is being presented, so like in my VP of sales roles, I'd be in like an exec meeting and I'd watch like, I don't know, head of customer success or marketing director or, operations lead or whatever it is. They come in, they're like, hey, I want to do this thing. And then the CFO goes, can we not wait 6 months though? Can we not do this in 6 months' time? Why do we have to do this now? And most of them couldn't really answer that question. They're like, well, I guess we could, but we really need the software. And if times are tough and money's not, readily available, they're going to struggle to justify and answer that question. Where if a seller goes, well, the reason that we need to do this now is that by implementing this solution, we're going to take our win rate back to 25%. So when we built our financial model at the beginning of the year, we put into the model that our win rate is going to be 25% because last year it was 25%. But at the moment, it's trending around 18%, and that's costing us X in lost revenue. That then is really clear. Okay, so for like a finance person, wow, so this error, this problem we're experiencing is costing us this amount of money. How much it costs for the plan, the solution? And it makes it really clear then, right? But people put these 30-page fancy slide decks together. You get 2 to 3 of the slides through and you're like, okay, I just can't take this anymore. I scroll to the bottom because that's where I know the pricing is. And they miss all of that great value in slide 9 and 11.
100%, yeah. And I will say, standing up for the marketing people out there, if you're a salesperson putting together a business case, the marketing team are your friends. Because if you've got a good marketing team, they'll understand kind of a pyramid structure of content. So having that small amount of content at the top that's really going to be the headline and then breaking it down by detail. So presentation doesn't need to be key. You don't, like James said, you don't need to put it in a fancy slide deck. It doesn't need to be 30 slides or 30 pages long, but actually having that key headline that's going to grab the attention of a C-suite exec is super important. And if you don't feel confident doing that, speak to someone in your marketing team. They're used to doing it. They should be used to doing it. I hope they're used to doing it. I will say as well, on a side note, I'm still captivated by the fact that there's a year-on-year measurement of attention spans for CEOs. That's amazing.
I know. I mean, it's probably powered by AI now, right? But yeah, you can pretty much get an answer to any question.
That's brilliant. I feel like
Yeah,
every employee would need this on their desk, like a small timer to say, today your CEO has 12 seconds of attention. So if you want to say something to them, it has to be really important and under 12 seconds. And you can almost like measure their temperament throughout the day by how their attention span changes. Get that on Kickstarter. So
yeah, 100%. But that's the thing, though, right? Is we need to be able to enable our champion to go and tell our value story. When you're not present, we've all seen the research as well. Like as sellers, we only spend about 5-10% of our time with our prospects through their buying journey. Okay, they're spending it with other vendors, they're spending it in internal project meetings, they're spending it trying to figure out how to get us set up on vendor onboarding systems, all of that kind of good stuff. So if we're only spending a small amount of time with our champion, with the buying group, then depending on our buyer, we need, and their maturity and sophistication, we need to be able to sell through them, right? And to do that, we need to be able to enable them with a 1-2 page business case. It needs to be focusing on value, so our value story. Yes, we want to talk about capability, but executives, economic buyers, they care about outcomes, not technology. They know technology powers those outcomes, but they want to understand, to Matt's point there, I've got very low attention span. I've got 3 of these conversations today, and I had 4 yesterday. And I'm busy with my typical day managing 12. I've got 1,200 people underneath me in the org structure. Get to the point fast, or get out, kind of thing. And those big pitch decks just aren't cutting it anymore. Especially like finance are getting involved in a lot lower down in the org in terms of like deal sizes as well. And that's another thing that we're seeing with our customers is finance are not just getting involved in like the 6-figure deals, they're getting involved in the low 5-figure deals as well, because there's so much scrutiny on on budget and the way that we're spending money these days.
100%. I've seen this firsthand where, a couple of years ago, 5 years ago plus, teams would have a budget and how they spent that money would be up to them. And then more recently, you're seeing teams have to go through like various levels in the organization just to get sign off for what they could have purchased by themselves before. So it's really important, like you said, to get that consensus from the champion, the organization, the buying team, the end users. Everyone needs to be on board with it. So, James,
Yeah.
coming back to the business case, there is an AI business case builder in the AI sales assistants. Now, this is
Yes.
going to be really good for anyone who isn't confident about building a business case because it's going to
Yeah.
ask you the questions, what's happening with your prospect, and then it's going to help you build that, right?
Yeah, so we just have to make an assumption, unfortunately, which I'm not a big fan of, but I think we can. There's plenty of data to support this one, that most sales organizations don't run enough training and enablement on these kind of things, like modern day skills that are required, like multi-threading business case, that kind of stuff. So, there has to be something that we do. So, in the sales university, we've built an entire learning path on that, about 8-9 months ago, because we were seeing our customers were struggling to create budget to justify the cost of their solution. So that when we started to build out our AI capability, the sales assistants, I wanted to do something that could help sellers that don't get any training, don't get any coaching, maybe they've never even seen a business case before, to be able to enable them to go and do it and not feel like they can't because their organization doesn't, prioritize training and enablement. So what we've done is we've prioritized that assistant over a few others, and the feedback so far has been incredible. So yeah, anyone that's really, really struggling to even understand what one looks like, just drop me a DM, drop Matt a DM, head over to the Revenue Enabler and go and check out the sales assistants. What it basically does, at like a 30,000 foot view, you go into the bot and it's going to ask you a series of questions. Now, if you struggle to answer these questions, this is going to be a skill gap moment, okay? Because they're fairly basic. It's going to ask you what's the company's biggest problem they're facing. It's going to ask you about the root cause analysis that you've done. What are the 2 to 3 things that are actually causing that problem to exist? It's going to ask you what the cost of their problem is, so you can put a cost of inaction statement in there. And then it's going to ask you what business metrics they are going to measure or what they need to see improve to help justify the cost of your solution. And then it's just going to ask you, which you probably can't get this part wrong, but maybe it's not going to be worded in the right way, so it's going to help you do that, is how do you plan to solve that problem? How does your capability uniquely solve that, and what are the differentiators. And it's going to then take that. So it's going to take you maybe 3 to 4 minutes to answer those questions. If you've asked your prospect those questions, that's probably in the CRM. So it's a copy and paste job. It's going to do that lift for you. And then at the end, it's going to say, hey, do you want a copy? And it's going to basically crunch that into a really attractive, really easy to digest 1-page business case using the template that my teams have been using for 5-6 years and that I was using as a seller. It's got the framework there, but it's just going to ask you the question. So it's hyper relevant for your prospects, for the opportunity you're working on. It's going to do the heavy lift for you. And it's going to do all of that probably max in 3-5 minutes.
Yeah, I think it's quicker than that. I've seen it work. It
Yeah.
was very, very quick. And again, just to elaborate on that kind of 30,000 foot view. So what you're essentially saying is you've got that information that you gathered on the discovery call. And then you open this up, it's going to ask you a series of questions, and you can input that information alongside other information you've gathered about your prospect. From
Yep.
that, that's going to build you your business case, right? So you need to
Yeah.
do that discovery call in as much detail as possible. And there's some really good videos on the YouTube channel, by the way, on discovery call and discovery coaching. So I'd recommend going to check those out. That's going to help you improve your discovery call if you are not collecting the right information for this business case, it's an important bridge between the two, because if you don't collect that information, your business case isn't really going to stand up to your prospects, right? So you need to be
Yeah.
doing both. But essentially, that's it. The information from the discovery call is going to be your best friend when it comes to the business case. And so is your champion as well.
Yeah.
Talking to your champion, they're going to understand the business, the sector, the industry. They should hopefully give you some insights as well, because they're going to want you to win as well. If they really like your product, they're going to want to get it in their organization. So, I mean, they're called a champion for a reason.
And look, I want to make sure that you were given lots of tactical advice on these, on these episodes. So one of the things that I'd highly recommend, guys, is the way I see AI. It's like last mile transportation. So if you drive into a city these days, you'll see like a park and ride. So you drive, 50 miles, you park in this car park, and then you get on a shuttle bus, and it's going to take you in, the last mile into the city. And that's how I see AI. So if you're using the right AI, and the right is the key word that has context, so you get the right content out, it should get you 80% of the way there. And that's the efficiency gain that sellers are going to get, right? But it still needs a human being to eyeball it and just do those final tweaks, maybe that 20%. So I'd copy what this business case, for example, this assistant is going to kick out, put it into a Google Doc, make some tweaks, put it in your customer's font, their branding colors, that kind of stuff. Make it feel like an internal document. And then this is a perfect moment to test your champion. And again, I don't want to get too deep into medic or champions here, but once you've identified a champion and you started to qualify them, this is another opportunity to re-qualify them, to test them, is by saying, hey, Matt, want to make sure we put our best foot forward here. I've started to build out a business case. I'd love your opinion on some of the copy here so that we can co-create this. Let's hop on a call, 15, 20 minutes. Let me take you what I've got. And then what I'm looking for is I'm looking for that champion to partner with me to co-create this business case and start to actually challenge me and inform the positioning and the messaging in that, right? So I might say things like, hey, Matt, when you guys have your internal project meetings about this problem, is there a project deck that you're using? Is there a specific project name that's being used for it? And I'm bringing that into the business case. I don't want it to have any of my branding or anything like that on it. I want it to really feel like this is Matt's business case. This is his cost justification. He can take it internally, but I want to do a lot of the heavy lifting for him. Okay, but it's not my job to do all of it. Matt has to have an input because he's so much closer to the problem as a champion than I am as a vendor. And that's really, really important to make sure that you're not just using AI and you're shipping it, just like I would never let AI write 100% of an outbound email. I'd get it to do 80%, and then I would tweak it to make sure it's 100%, aligned to that customer's organization.
Amazing. So look, we're reaching time now. I would say the takeaways that I've got from today are clearly, when you're doing that discovery call, you need to be collecting the right information for your business case. Secondly, you really need to be working with your champion to kind of validate that business case, because you need to get it through them first. They need to sign off on this business case, because if they're not buying it, no one else is going to buy it, correct?
Yeah, 100%.
Great. And my third one is If you are not familiar with business cases, or you haven't spent a lot of time putting them together, or you don't have the time to put them together, there is a tool that can help you as well, which is the AI Sales Assistance Business Case Builder, which you can find on the revenueenabler.com. James, any final thoughts?
I don't think so. I think just as sellers, look, the game's changing. It's always evolving. I think the best sellers have an open mind. They're adaptable. They know that there's not just one way to sell. They know that every now and then the game's going to change and they have to adapt. And unfortunately, I listen to far too many calls and do too much coaching with sales reps and sales teams. And some of the attitudes is, hey, I've been in the game for a long time. I don't need to change. And they're usually the ones that are really struggling. And it's because they're running old playbooks, old tactics and strategies that just no longer work, or they're not as effective today as they used to be. So yeah, all I would say, like with any of this, if you really want to double down and hit your number in 2025, take some time, look at the way you're operating. If you're missing the mark in a couple of key areas, have an open mind. It's okay to have skill gaps. We all have them. As long as we're working on closing them, that's the key here. So if your organization isn't prioritizing training and coaching, there's nothing on the planet that would have a bigger impact on your sales performance than those two things. Reach out to one of us. We'll get you set up on the Sales University or the Sales Assistants, so you can start closing those skill gaps and hit your number this year.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, James. And thank you for listening to Hit Your Numbers. We hope you've walked away with at least one idea that you can use and use today to move the needle. And if you like what you heard, make sure you subscribe to the Hit Your Numbers newsletter, packed with actionable tips, fresh insights, and behind-the-scenes content every week.
All right, thanks for listening to this episode. I've got something else I want to give you before we wrap up here. So we've built the leading skill optimization platform with 400 plus sales lessons, 12 courses from prospecting all the way through to late stage deal negotiation and more, one-to-one sales coaching and AI sales assistance. And I want to give you 7 days free access to the platform. The reason I want to do this is because nobody gets a degree in B2B sales. And after training and coaching hundreds of sales reps and teams in the last 2 years, most haven't mastered critical selling skills. And it's preventing them from being promoted, earning great money, and building a great career in B2B sales. So go to the revenueenabler.com, grab a free trial, and join hundreds of salespeople that are closing their skill gaps and mastering sales. There's a link in the video description. I'm looking forward to getting you set up. Give me a shout with any questions.